Hey y'all, before we get started, I have masks available now. A live video the second Saturday of every single month. And we are drinking tea from this, and I have a link to it in the description. Cinnamon rooibos and forever nuts and peppermint, peachy and strawberry, sweet tart and cotton candy, tranquility and alpine punch and birthday cake, and they're great. So I've almost used this one up in 2 weeks, but we're gonna be getting way off the science here and really far out in La La Magic land, so hang on to yourself. Yes, I am the science person, but I don't know how to explain what I also am, so you're just gonna have to go with me here where I'm going. So science knows some shit, and if you've done any entheogens, you know some shit that you found out while you were out there that you may or may not know where to put it. And if you're given to flights of fancy, then you believe some stuff that is not very mainstream and definitely falls outside the realm of science. So what we do know about Amanita's mycelium is that it is an information superhighway. It's the internet for trees. And we are learning, and I believe it's just scratching the surface and just the very beginning of what Amanita mycelium does. So we know that it feeds trees nutrients that it needs from the soils. One of the things that we know now that happens is that a mature tree uses the mycelial network of the Amanita to funnel nutrients to new seedlings around it, but not all of them. How does it choose? We don't know. But we know that it will pick a seedling and funnel nutrients to that one, but not 2 others, or 2 of them, but not 1 other. We know that trees use chemical signals in the air. They pick up those signals and funnel that information down into the mycelium and spread it to trees in the direction that they know that that information is moving. Okay, look, first of all, how is the tree relating directional information in addition to chemical information? How's it giving it to the mycelium? How does the mycelium interpret that and know which direction to then send the signal through its mycelium? How far does it send it? When it gets there and the new trees get the information, say a half a mile away, what are they going to do with that information? Okay, so here's the thing. There's a reason they're doing it, because that's energy expensive to do. They wouldn't be doing it unless the trees are also able to respond defensively. If all this is going on, and it has been going on around us for thousands of years, what else is going on? And this is where I fall off of the science and into the fancy, and it's this. If there's anything I've learned in my life, it's that when we scratch the surface of something complex, it's an ecosystem and entities within that ecosystem, when we just start learning about it, eventually we find out the huge complexity of it. And we find out that when they thought they were learning everything, they learned very little. And we found out later they were just scratching the surface of what they knew. And then 20 years later, we find out they open a whole new Pandora's box, which then another 50 years later, they find out is still just the basic beginning. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. When we know very little, we think we know a lot, and then the more we know we don't know. Knowing that, I believe we're still just at the very beginning. We are babies, toddlers in the science of what we don't know, about things that are going on outside of our brains that we can't even measure yet, like extrasensory perceptions and thoughts and the power and energy of thoughts, and 3rd dimension and 4th dimension stuff. When we start studying things like the physiology of trees, and we're learning what we're learning about them, and we're just scratching the surface of that, and then we find out that spores were in meteorites, and then there's the theories that these mushrooms may be aliens. Which mushrooms are aliens? All the mushrooms are aliens? So do you see how I'm going back and forth between what we know and what we don't know, and then in flights of fancy and off into magic land? Because I can. Because I'm not a researcher writing a thesis or a hypothesis for a scientific experiment. This is my YouTube channel. And this is where my brain goes, and these are the things that I think about. And so if Amanita got here on the back of a meteorite and it blew in, and then it's perfectly suited to this environment, and we have receptors for the things that it is making because it somehow knew to make them. If it is a superhighway for trees, if the trees are getting things out of the wind, and we are walking on the ground that the mycelium is on, and it is pulling information from the ground down into its mycelium, and it's pulling information from the trees down into its mycelium. Is that the only way that it's learning? Is through chemical analysis of the air, of the soil, and all of that it's sucking into its mycelium? Or does it also have a way of hearing? So when we thud onto the ground, when we walk, is it taking those vibrations and turning them into its version of sound? Is it listening? Sight is actually chemical. It's hitting our retinas. We take that and turn it into chemical signals, which we then use to translate stuff in the brain. All of our senses are chemical. We just translate it into what we call vision using light. We know that they don't do photosynthesis with the light. This is a total assumption on my part, which has no basis in fact, but I'm making the assumption that the fact that they live on Earth, the fact that every single living thing on Earth needs the light for something, that light is being used by the mycelium or by the fruiting bodies. We know that they know when it's dark because that's when they release their spores. But what else are they doing with light? If they use light, are they creating sight? Their version of sight. So now I'm asking you, if they feel the ground vibrate, if their mycelium can feel the vibrations and turn that into a translated piece of information, that's sound waves. They can hear. If they're using light, can they see? Their version of sight, not an eyeball version of sight. But why are we going to limit what sight is? Because our sight is taking light and translating into chemical signals. If they're taking light and translating it into chemical signals, what do they see? Do they see us? The animals, the insects? Can they see the chemical toxins and poisons blowing in the wind? In addition to tasting them, smelling them, hearing it, getting it from all of the ways that it pulls information in, because that's its body. Its body is the mycelium. Its body lives touching the surface and touching down around the roots of trees and all the layers of soil. That's its body, and those are its senses. Our body happens to be this, and our senses happen to be eyeballs and ears and skin and smell. Like, we get information from a lot of different sources. Mycelium gets information from a lot of different sources. Those are all of its senses. So when I talk about this mushroom as a living entity that's thinking and feeling and has motives, when I talk about all of its personalities and entities, when I talk about the fact that it has hopes and dreams and wishes, who's to say that it wouldn't and doesn't? If it is its own living kingdom, its own living entity, its own living body with all of its own senses that functions in its own way, and it also forms relationships with trees, and it has a reproductive cycle, I think it's arrogant and short-sighted to think that every other living thing is only like us and only does things the way we do things and the way we see the world. But people take that even one step further and say, no, we're the only living things that have all these things, that have sentience and have hopes and dreams and wishes and thoughts and passions and can feel. So this is where I go. So it's not just these ideas and concepts when I talk to you about this mushroom, about its wishes and hopes and what it's doing. It's also from taking the mushroom, from my trips on the mushroom, from my discussions with this mushroom, seeing the entities of this mushroom and having them talk to me, and me having discussions and conversations with it. Sometimes I cry when I'm talking to you about what it wants to say, because what if it could talk? What if one of those mushrooms could say, this is how I'm feeling, and this is what's breaking my heart, and it could cry, and it could hurt, and it could do this on camera in front of you. You would be like, holy shit, let's help the mushroom. Because these are the experiences that I have with it. And I could sit here and defend myself, but I'm not going to, because I know myself. I know how I got here. I know that I'm an intelligent person. I know cognitive bias. I understand magical thinking and stress related thinking and hope and, you know, all this stuff, how you can easily fall off a cliff. And I understand the science. Although, you know, some days I'm like, yeah, whatever. And I understand the limits of science, but I also am not limited by science. And I can take all these experiences and I can dream. And I don't think all of it is a dream. I don't think all of it is ridiculous and fanciful. And now maybe you're starting to see just a little bit of why my channel is named Amanita Dreamer. I love you, beautiful people.